All right, so welcome back. Now we are in part two of the remarks by Bernard Gagan on transmedia as a concept, its history, some of the fields and areas in which it came from. Um, Now, I just mentioned some readings that I think you might want to consider. The two readings that are really key there are by Ivan Sutherland and J.C.R. Licklider. These are two people who in the mid 20th century start thinking about what it would mean to have something like interactive computers or interactive machines. Um, More specifically, I would say they're theorists of interactivity as a kind of state of openness. Okay, between humans and machines that's going to pivot, that's going to organize itself around multimedia interactivity. Um, so Ivan Sutherland, he's known as the father of computer graphics, for example, in some circles, because of his work developing. Let's see here, the Sketchpad, the man-machine graphical communication system. J.C.R. Licklider is a much more general theorist of uh, the problem of human-machine interaction and the type of psychology or mentalities that are going to organize human-machine interactivity. Both of them are consultants to something called Lincoln Laboratory. This is a major installation. It's a scientific unit, but it's in practice really more of a military research center at MIT. It's launched in the 50s. It continues well into the 1960s. There may be even some incarnation of it today. I'm not really sure about that. And its purpose was to develop the SAGE missile defense system, right? The purpose of Lincoln Laboratories initially was to develop software and interfaces and things like that that would allow for the design of a national radar network that was able to prevent Soviet missiles from entering United States territories. So this is an early Cold War project. That is to say, it's a project that dates to the rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union and their associated satellite countries, the countries within their sphere of influence, and a sort of rivalry between a particular economic mode and another economic mode, in which, in the case of the 50s and 60s, both sides built up larger and larger technological systems for defense, and in particular, they developed things such as computers that would be responsible for launching, controlling, defending against missile and other kinds of attacks. So here's the question. Why is it that in the middle of a problem of, say, the United States defending itself against, it's actually not even Soviet missiles, it's more Soviet jets, Soviet planes that are carrying bombs within them. Missiles come a little bit later, and that's a different story that we won't get into today. But why is it that in this problem of Soviet jets and their bombs, you have these two people, Ivan Sutherland and J.C.R. Licklider, who develop something like computer graphics and even something like a psychology of human-machine interaction, a psychology of human-computer symbiosis. So the answer to that really relates to the fact that computers work incredibly fast in abstract mathematical and technical languages, in zeros and ones at the most basic level. And so this rapid calculation, this rapid thinking that they do in a very particular type of language, I'm already slipping into the language of Sutherland and Licklider by saying the computer thinks. It's symptomatic of the research in these projects. So it will allow me to use that slippery terminology. So computer thinking in zeros and ones is in many ways more rapid than many types of human thinking. And of course, it's not easily understood or read by humans, right? So the problem when you're developing large-scale missile defense systems and you're having computers, for example, scan the sky and watch for planes, jets, other enemies, is that you need to find a way to translate all of the activities that are being done by the machine into a format that is readable or accessible to human users. And so one of the things you get out of that is the development of new interfaces of the kind you see here. So on the left, you have a diagram, and on the right, you have a photograph of what the diagram represents. And these are the radar defense interfaces that connected to the SAGE missile defense system that was developed in the 50s and the 60s. And you'll notice the hallmark of the interface is that it has this large circular screen. Now, this was a kind of tremendous innovation in the 1950s and in the 1960s. Up until then, computers largely worked through things like punch cards or printouts. They had no live real-time interaction, and they certainly didn't have anything like images or graphical user interfaces. But if you look at some of the things that this device is charged with doing, displaying a situation, displaying digital information, displaying radar data, tracking flight plans, geography and sites, that is giving a layout of planes moving through the sky, giving a layout of geography. You also see something like an audible alarm. These are all ways of taking all the rapid types of information that the computer is rapidly processing and giving them something like a human-friendly, a human-readable format. They even have in this device something called a light gun, which is an early predecessor of the mouse. So in this problem of trying to track the sky for enemy planes, and this problem of bringing large computers to bear on the problem of tracking the sky and protecting a territory, you develop a new set of technologies for translating information between a computer format that is more or less existing in code, existing in highly abstract mathematical formulas, in real time into visual outputs, into even interactive outputs insofar as you have the Leica, into audio outputs, right? So I'd like for you to think of this as one possible birth, one possible origin of transmedia, right? Because developing these systems, developing these large-scale defense systems meant you couldn't simply think about how do I represent, say, the sky when we're watching it for Soviet planes. You rather had to think about how do I come up with multiple representations at the same time. Some of these representations are going to be computer readable. Some of these representations are going to be human readable. And the representations that are human readable are going to act on a couple of different modes, a couple of different ways. There'll be visual, there'll be audio, there'll be tactile, that is physical interactivity, all happening at the same time. So in a way, this early radar display is a kind of real-time transmedia system, right? At the beginning, at the early dawn of the computer era, if we imagine there's something like a computer era, you see the development of a new type of computer interface that is all about circulating media across modes, across different ways of interactivity. Now, let's unpack a little bit more why exactly you need these interactive systems. Why exactly you need all these modes of communication. Part of the problem is that in the 50s, in the 60s, you're dealing with the type of warfare that happens at new speeds. That is, you have planes, you have jets, you have bombs of massive destructive power traveling at great speeds. So it's helpful to have, for example, computers that can track these devices more rapidly than the naked human eye. The other problem, however, is that tracking this type of situation, in this case, the entire frontier up the East Coast, up the West Coast of North America that the US is defending, tracking that large area at once involves bringing together a lot of different elements, not just the human and the machine, but actually whole teams of humans, whole armies of machines, even things like planes, even things like ground observers that are going to work together all at once to try and scan the sky for this possible threat, for these Soviet bombers. And so the development of this transmedia format, that is information that's circulating between one form and another rapidly, is partially about bridging human and machine, but it's also about taking all these different types of elements and integrating them into a system that can interact with one another in real time. So you need some type of information or communication that can circulate among many humans, many machines, all more or less simultaneously. So to understand the complexity of this system and why it might have led to the development of the first real-time digital interactive systems, as well as the first psychology, the first psychological theories of human-machine interaction. I'm going to show you a video. This video is about, it's a bit long. It could be as long as 5 minutes, could be even 10 minutes, that shows the SAGE missile defense system in action. So after we watch it, I'm going to make a few more remarks about what we just saw. Here we go.
The long-range radars which constantly scan the skies detect all planes in flight.
Oops.
The information is flashed.
Let's go back to the beginning and start that once more. Here we go.
The long-range radars which constantly scan the skies detect all planes in flight. The information is flashed electronically to the direction center, where the computer instantaneously makes the necessary calculations and displays its findings as tracks on the scopes at the consoles. In the air surveillance section, tracking operators monitor all traffic in the sector and quickly relay unidentified tracks to operators in the identification section who determine that the tracks are hostile. An alarm sounds in the weapons direction section. The senior director and senior weapons director size up the threat using all the up-to-the-minute information displayed before them on the scope. The defensive weapons they might use are Bomark and Nike, which are installed around the major cities, symbolized by the smaller circles. The protective range of these missiles is shown by the larger circles. Interceptor air bases, there are 3 of them here, are symbolized as small airplanes with letters designating their locations. The hostile track appears in this manner, with symbols which tell important facts. In this case, U means no interceptors have been assigned to the track. The second U, no ground-to-air missiles have been assigned. H, the track is hostile. G, tracking is good. P, the track is not yet assigned to a weapons team. And M means the track is at medium altitude, that is between 10 and 30,000 feet. A137 is the number assigned to the track. The vector line shows the direction and by its length the speed at which the enemy is flying. To determine if interceptors should be used against the hostile, another display is obtained. The squares indicate the intercept points for aircraft from 2 of the bases. O20M and O15M indicate the time to interception in minutes. I-200 and I-150 indicate the distances from air bases to intercept points. On the basis of this information, constantly supplied by the computer, the track is assigned to a weapons director who decides that interceptor aircraft should be sent against the enemy. Immediately, the weapons director assigns the control of the intercept to an intercept director, whose situation display shows him that fighter craft have been scrambled. The situation display also indicates that the interceptors are assigned to track A137. I indicates interceptor aircraft. G, that tracking is good. 1, the number of the controlling weapons director. 2, the number of the intercept director. A vector symbol indicates the heading of the fighters as they fly toward the point at which interception will take place. RL-15 is the intercept flight code number. Thus, the intercept director has the information he needs to direct his portion of the air battle. And the battle begins. At 28,000 feet, the bombers speed toward their targets. But jet interceptors roar to the attack, guided by electronic impulses received directly from the computer, supervised by the intercept director miles away. Now comes the test. Were the calculations correct? Were our judgments right? With weapons rushing toward each other faster than the speed of sound, the slightest error can mean failure, and bombers free to strike with nuclear bombs. The console display shows the intercept weapons approaching, and the battle is joined. fighters lock on target, and rockets are fired. The battle is over. The enemy destroyed. But one important task yet remains for the computer: to guide the interceptors safely back to their bases. A successful mission has been performed by SAGE, the air defense system with the electronic eyes and the incredible speed necessary to counterattack swiftly against an enemy. But we know that time does not stand still, that new and more powerful weapons are being developed, which makes the job of defending our security ever more difficult. The SAGE system provides us, on the North American continent, the finest possible air defense against attack by manned bombers, the #1 threat of today.
Okay, so I'm going to pause that there. Now, we've seen a kind of dramatized staging of the SAGE missile defense system, SAGE air defense system in action. And there are a couple of hallmarks of it. The first being, it's clearly dealing with more than just a single interface and a single user, right? But rather you have whole entire teams of users, whole entire teams of interfaces, which themselves are interacting in real time with a potential battle that spreads across many types of technologies, many types of locations, where the computer is the kind of, let's call it a universal medium. The computer is allowing all these different elements to interact all at once, right? And so it's out of this problem of having a large team of actors, human and machine actors, distributed in a network up and down a coast that need to communicate in real time, that you start developing the problem of how to translate, how to communicate in real time among all these parts according to the different modes that are appropriate to them. In, for example, information transmitted over telephone lines. In, for example, information processed within a machine by software, or programs is a really better term than software. In visual outputs that allow a human to recognize instantly what's happening on a battlefield really far away. In audio alarms that could ring so that you don't just get a visual output, but you get a kind of instantaneous additional set of warnings coming through a different channel, a different medium, that of sound. We could continue and we could go on and on. There are, in fact, other parts of this system that involve maps, observers in different rooms, right? But it's in this system, it's in this context that you start developing the first graphical computer interfaces and the first psychology of real-time interaction among humans and machines that's going to happen according to multiple media formats, right? So this is why I'm saying transmedia develops in a very important sense out of the conditions of mid-century warfare, out of a field of battle that is distributed, where things are happening quite rapidly, where you need machines to be there carrying out the action, but you also need humans to control the machines. So you need both a set of techniques for translating information from one format into another, from, say, visual to mathematical to audio and so on. And you also need, for example, the developments of a new kind of psychology, a new theory of what is human activity, human agency, human thought, such that it can exist inside these distributed networks. And that's what brings us, just to step back a minute, to Sutherland and Licklider. That is, to Licklider's psychology, so to speak, of human-machine symbiosis, and to Sutherland's early efforts to develop this man-machine graphical communication system that he calls Sketchpad. Now, I'm going to pause there, and then we're going to go a little deeper in the history of these types of transmedia systems and their development in the course of the 20th century.